Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. In addition to the presidential race and the constitutional amendments on abortion and marijuana, voters will also decide in November whether Republican Rick Scott should remain in the United States Senate. It is one of the races that will determine the balance of power in the Senate, and the Democrat leading the race to try to challenge him in November is former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, who is here with us in studio. Thank you for coming in. Let's just dive right in. We premiered last Sunday a new poll from CBS that has the race right now with Rick Scott at 45 and you at 37. Clearly, it's a name ID issue. People are still getting to know you. What's your assessment of Rick Scott ahead of you right now in the polls? So,
you know, we still have a few months before the election, and I have been touring the state, introducing myself to people in the northern parts of the state that really didn't get to know me. I know a lot of people here in South Florida have had the opportunity to get to know about me because I was elected in 2018. So I'm not paying too much attention right now to the polls. We still have months ahead, and I will continue to tour around the state. The interesting part of that poll, though, is that Rick Scott has hit his ceiling. This man has been in office for over 14 years, and what I keep hearing around the state is that they don't want Rick Scott back in the Senate. He has done nothing for Floridians. People are very disenchanted with his past, with everything that he's done when he was governor, and now in the Senate he really has done nothing except vote against any sort of bipartisan bills that would help the people of Florida. So one of the things that he announced this week is that he is going to try to become the Senate Republican leader, replacing Mitch McConnell. Your reaction to that? Well, first of all, a little arrogant in his part. He hasn't even been reelected, and he's already making plans to become leader. He lost that race already. I would assume that people wouldn't support him, but it's extremely dangerous. This race has become much more critical than ever, because what would the Senate look like with Rick Scott being the leader of that group? He wants to eliminate Social Security and Medicare. He has been very vocal about repealing the Affordable Care Act. He wants to raise taxes on middle-class families, and he's been on the air defending that stance. So he would be a disaster to families, not just here in Florida, but across our country. Well, let's get into it. What do you believe is the driving issue that is going to motivate voters in this race, and what are you playing to more than anything? Yeah, as I've been traveling, you know, for months now, everywhere I go, whether it's in Gainesville talking to students at UF, Orlando talking to seniors, it's the affordability crisis that we're facing. People in the state of Florida can't afford to live here. I spoke to a senior that has to go back to work because he can't pay for his property insurance bills. Students can't actually afford to pay rent. They have to live at home with their parents. And so I just released an affordability plan because we need to find solutions to these issues. I strongly feel that in order for this state to continue to grow, to continue to show economic progress, we have to tackle the affordability crisis. One of the things, though, that we showed in the CBS poll that I thought was really telling and a problem for Democrats overall, we asked them, if Trump wins the presidency, will you be financially better off or worse off? And 47% believe they will be financially better off. A much smaller number think that they'll be worse off. Most think that it may not have any effect. If Biden wins, though, 52% of Floridian voters, Florida voters, said they believe that the financial situation will be worse under Joe Biden. How do you buck those headwinds to convince voters that you, as a Democrat, actually have a formula for helping the affordability issue? You know, it's interesting because we all know that the data is showing that there is economic growth, but the reality is that the people are not feeling it because of big oil. We're seeing gas prices continue to go up, and I was just talking to someone. I'm the person that is looking for the different gas stations. Where can I, you know, save a little bit on my gas tank? And Rick Scott has absolutely no idea. He's so out of touch. He's the wealthiest senator in Washington. He continues to use his position to enrich himself. So he's done nothing to try and help families here feel some relief. We had an infrastructure bill that would bring jobs to Florida, and he voted against it. Over $1 billion voting against this bill. Well, give me a sense for, I mean, I've looked at your plan, you know, to lower costs for Floridians. Give me an idea. One of the things that you talk about is expanding the child tax credit. I will tell you that the Scott campaign hits back and sort of says that you had an opportunity to do that with a bill
a few years ago, and you didn't come out in support of it.
Actually, it was Democrats that introduced the child tax credit, and what he's talking about is the tax bill that gave tax cuts to the wealthiest, the top 0.1%, and then
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. That's what he's referring to. That's the bill that he wants to continue to support. But let's look at his 6 years in the Senate. What has he done? And the response to that is nothing. You can't trust Rick Scott to do anything to find relief for working families in the state of Florida. And so I released this plan, which would lower the cost of property insurance rates. There's a bill on the House that doesn't have a Senate companion, which would reduce prices by 25%. We need to keep the reduction of medicine. We negotiated that when I was in the House, lowering prescription drug prices. What does Rick Scott want to do? He wants to repeal those costs that were lowered, that caps insulin at $35, instead of continuing to work with pharmaceutical companies. And so he's someone that will say anything to get reelected. He wants to maintain power because he has ambitions.
Well, I want to play for you. This is one of the ads that he is currently running, and this is sort of the tenor and tone of his campaign. Let's play that now, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
We teach values to our children, the difference between right and wrong, truth and lies. But then we send our kids to school where some radical socialist teacher doesn't teach them math or English. No, they're taught that men can have babies and become women, and that we should worship the God of government, not the God who created us. That is socialism.
I'm not even sure. I don't know what school he's referring to. I don't know what school is teaching that men can have babies, or that God is socialist, or whatever. But this is the nature of the campaign that's going to be run against you, is by just proclaiming socialism. That's worked in the past in Florida, though.
Look, Rick Scott has become the poster child of radical extremism in Washington, D.C. He's much more aligned with Marjorie Taylor Greene, with the Freedom Caucus, than he is with regular Floridians trying to make it. We have a teacher shortage. I actually have received messages from teachers. They are outraged that he is insinuating that teachers are not taking their profession seriously. They're underpaid. They need support and resources to be able to teach our kids so that they can face the challenges coming ahead. And what is Rick Scott doing? Using false advertisement with the money that he took from committing Medicare fraud. Let's be honest here. And it's insulting for someone like me that left Latin America, leaving and understanding what socialist dictatorships look like, coming here seeking for freedom, and then having someone like Rick Scott, who has been stealing funds from the government, use that money to lie to Floridians. So let me just say, I am ready to debate him on this issue and any other issue, and teachers will be with me. They are insulted by that ad.
I want to get your reaction to a couple of things that was in the news this past week. The TSA, the federal government, allowed Cuban officials to tour Miami International Airport on May 20th of all day, Cuban Independence Day. Did the Biden administration make a serious mistake here?
Look, this is a federal agency that should have coordinated with the mayor, with local elected officials, including Rick Scott. You know where Rick Scott was on May 20th when this occurred? Here in Miami. You're telling me he had no idea that this was happening? It also occurred under Carlos Jimenez a couple of times, but it's completely outrageous. I mean, there should be at least some sort of communication with the local elected officials. And it seems to me that Rick Scott is much more preoccupied on attending a trial in New York City, attacking the judge and his family, than paying attention to what's happening here in his state, and it's dangerous.
I think, you know, when we talk about the issues in this campaign, I think Democrats were really hoping and believing that the abortion issue would be a game changer. I know that early on you also made some statements where you basically said this will completely change the dynamics of the race. Again, the polling suggests abortion is not the driving factor today. To get people to the polls. The economy is, and that people will decide their votes based on the economy. Where do you see abortion fitting into this race?
Jim, I think abortion is a top issue regardless of what the polls are showing. I've been talking to a lot of Floridians. I had a conversation with a 72-year-old man. I asked him, what's your top issue? And he said it was abortion. And I was surprised when he said that to me. And he said his aunt had died before Roe v. Wade, and it had devastated his entire family. And he has 2 daughters. And for him, he wants to do everything in his power to protect those freedoms for women. This is central to our health care. This is central to the dignity of a woman, to make that decision between herself, her doctor, her family, her faith, without politicians like Rick Scott interfering in that decision. It's extremely dangerous. Rick Scott wants to push a national abortion ban. He has his name on the bill. He said on day one that he would sign any abortion bill that comes to his desk if he goes back into the Senate. And we know that it's linked to a high rate of violence against women. As a mom of 2 daughters, I'm very concerned that we are now living in a state where our daughters are not going to have access to critical health care. And let me just share this other story, Jim. I had a roundtable with many women. One of them was a Colombian older woman. Her daughter, when she was pregnant, at 16 weeks, the doctor said that the fetus was not developing properly. And it was a very difficult decision for her daughter to have to face the termination of that pregnancy. But she was so grateful that she had that access to that critical health care. And she was crying, sharing the story to me. And so I believe that this will be one of the top 2 issues in this race. And we're seeing it as we talk to young students, to young people, to women, and it's not political.
Give me your sense as to why you think Democrats have struggled in the state of Florida for a while. The last statewide Democrat to be elected was Nikki Fried to the agriculture office. Before that, Bill Nelson. You know, governors going back at least 2 decades. Why are Democrats having such a problem getting their message across in Florida?
I think it's a variety of reasons. I talked about this after 2020. There has been a lot of disinformation targeting our communities that we didn't realize was happening. That's one reason. But I also feel that we haven't made the investments to be able to communicate directly to voters on the issues that matter to us, that we want to advance, that will help them and make their lives just a little easier. We haven't had investments in voter registration. We haven't had investments in voter turnout. And that's the result. We saw it in 2022, but this is going to be a completely different cycle. I do want to ask before we wrap up, if you are elected to the United States Senate, you know, would you continue to fund both weapons for Ukraine and for Israel? And are you? And I'd like to hear your thoughts as to what Israel is doing in Gaza and whether or not you're supportive of the way Netanyahu has handled this. I've been very clear from the beginning that my husband's Jewish, and I've been always a very strong supporter of Israel. I did when I was in Congress, and we need to continue to support Israel and its right to defend itself. I'm extremely concerned in the rise of anti-Semitism. There are so many families that have children in these colleges where we've been seeing these protests where they fear for their safety because of the rise in anti-Semitism, and we have to denounce all forms of hate. I feel very strongly about that. When I was in Congress, I voted to send aid to Israel. I think that we need to support our allies that are fighting for democracy abroad. Rick Scott voted against aid to Israel, not once but twice.
Are you concerned?
He has voted against aid to Ukraine, extremely dangerous.
Are you concerned, though, about the way Israel is prosecuting the war in Gaza?
I think that we have to do everything in our power in the United States to make sure that those hostages are returned. And I know some families that lost lives, that this woman that lost her niece and her nephew, and one of the children of this couple was taken hostage, a 3-year-old. We need to do everything to release those hostages. That comes first, but we have to protect civilian life. As a mother, as someone that has been watching those images, it is incredibly hurtful to see children that are dying. We have to do what we can in our power to send humanitarian aid to Gaza, and at the same time try to find a way to end the war, but not before releasing the hostages.
Right. I got to cut it off here. Again, you're welcome back. We'll continue these conversations as voters try to sort through all this. I do think this is an important election, and I don't think it's one that's already been decided. Yeah. So we'll see. All right. When we come back, we will be joined by the chair of the Florida Republican Party, Evan Power. Stay with us.